Level 1. Worst. Thompson M1928A1 and Erma EMP-35. These guns were masterpieces of craftsmanship, designed before anyone understood what industrialized war would demand. First SMG at Level 1, Thompson M1928A1. This weapon needs no introduction. The Thompson, the Tommy gun, the Chicago typewriter. The US military paid about $200 per gun, over $4,000 today for a single SMG. Why was it so expensive? Because it was overbuilt. This SMG is 11 pounds of milled steel, used a finned barrel for cooling, and often included a cuts compensator to control climb. Every part required skilled machinists. It was a beautiful machine in a world that desperately needed a simple SMG. It fired the .45 ACP with a 20-round magazine at 600 RPM. The Thompson used a Blish-lock delayed blowback system. Inside the bolt was a tiny H-shaped brass wedge, beautifully machined, and completely unnecessary. Later testing proved the gun worked just as well without it. Millions of dollars, thousands of man-hours, spent on a feature that did nothing. To a paratrooper, it felt like jumping with a boat anchor. The drums rattled, the action jammed in the mud, and the cost was astronomical. Why Level 1? Because the Thompson was a pre-war masterpiece trapped in a total war nightmare. Second SMG at Level 1, Erma EMP-35. At 8 pounds of machined steel and hand-carved wood, it was built for precision, featuring a telescoping spring system to fight off dirt and a grip that fits your hand like a glove. The EMP-35 fired 9mm parabellum from 25, 30, or 32-round magazines at 450 RPM. Wars aren't won with craftsmanship, they're won with volume. It was so expensive and slow to build that it never stood a chance against the industrial reality of World War II. So why Level 1? This SMG was over-engineered. It was simply too expensive to mass produce. Level 1 SMG's beautiful, expensive failures. They represent a world that still believed wars would be small. Level 2. Bad. MP38 and Beretta M1938. Industrial precision wasn't about being cheap. It was about being deadly, controllable, and professional. First SMG at Level 2. MP38. The MP38 is the world's first modern SMG. It ditched wood furniture for a folding metal stock and weighed 9 pounds, making it ideal for paratroopers and tank crews. It fired 9mm from a 32-round magazine at 500 RPM. The receiver featured longitudinal grooves designed to reduce weight and trap dirt, so the bolt could keep moving. Brilliant idea, terrible for mass production. Every groove had to be individually milled. With a dangerous flaw, if the bolt did not lock forward, dropped, it could slam forward and fire. Accidental discharges became so common that Germany issued leather safety straps to hold the bolt in place. The MP38 was smooth, controllable, and revolutionary, but still too slow to build. Why Level 2? It represents the halfway point between craftsmanship and mass production. Second SMG at Level 2, Beretta M1938. Historians consider it the finest SMG of the war. It weighed 9 pounds, it fired 9mm from a 40-round magazine at 600 RPM. Its most famous feature was the dual trigger system. Front trigger fired semi-auto, rear trigger fired full auto. No selector switch, just instinct. It used a heavy bolt and a beautifully crafted wood stock. Italian troops loved it. German troops loved it. The Waffen-SS captured Berettas whenever possible. The downside was time and cost. It was simply too expensive for large-scale wartime production. Why Level 2? It represents extraordinary pre-war European craftsmanship, both its greatest strength and its biggest weakness. Level 2 SMGs. While Germany and Italy were chasing perfection, other nations were about to discover that speed mattered more than beauty. Level 3, below average. M3, grease gun, and Type 100. This is the industrial revolution of small arms. Craftsmanship gives way to the era of the disposable weapon. The US looked at the Thompson's price tag and panicked. First SMG at Level 3, M3 grease gun. The M3 was built by General Motors and made from stamped steel, 2 halves spot welded together. It looked cheap because it was. Cost about $20 per gun. It weighed 8 pounds and fired 45 ACP from a 30-round box magazine at 450 RPM. That low rate of fire made it surprisingly controllable. Early versions used a fragile crank handle. To cock the gun, you stuck your finger into a hole in the bolt and pulled. Ugly, simple, effective. Why level 3? The US Army looked at the Thompson's $200 price tag, glanced at a grease gun in a mechanic shop, and said, "Make it look like that." Second SMG at level 3, Type 100. It fired 8mm Nambu from 30-round magazines at 450 RPM. Wartime versions removed the bipod and simplified the design. Manufacturing remained expensive and limited. Japan never embraced SMGs the way the US, Germany, or the USSR did. Fewer than 30,000 Type 100s were produced. Why level 3? Represents a nation experiment. Level 4. Average PPSh-41 and Suomi KP-31. The Soviets were trying to save their civilization. They didn't want a cheap gun, but a wall of lead. These were built anywhere one could run a press: clock factories, rail shops, auto plants. First SMG at level 4, PPSh-41. The PPSh-41 takes us to the frozen ruins of Stalingrad. It was a political statement. The Soviets produced over 6 million by 1945. This becomes the primary SMG of entire divisions, equipping whole companies, unleashing a wall of fire no bolt-action rifle could stand against. Made from stamped steel, built to survive a Siberian winter. It weighed 8 pounds with a chrome-lined barrel to fire thousands of rounds of corrosive ammunition without rust or excessive wear. It fired 7.62 Tokarev from 71-round drum magazines at 900 RPM. These drums were hand-fitted to individual guns. Grab the wrong one, and it might jam instantly. The sound was unforgettable, like ripping fabric. German troops feared it. The bolt slammed into the receiver, and the Soviets added a simple leather buffer to keep the gun from tearing itself apart. It was crude, it was loud, it was terrifying. German soldiers were known to ditch their MP40s to scavenge PPSh-41s whenever they could. Why level 4? The first true volume of fire monster. Second SMG at level 4, Suomi KP-31. The Suomi KP-31 fired 9mm from 71-round drum magazines at 900 RPM. Soviet forces encountered Finnish ski troops armed with Suomis, ambushing entire columns and dumping drum after drum into dense formations. The Suomi was accurate, beautifully machined, and extremely expensive. Finland simply couldn't produce them at the Soviet scale. Why level 4? Proved a brutal truth. In close quarters, volume of fire wins. Level 4 SMGs are about brute force and psychological warfare. The Soviet philosophy was simple. If you can't outshoot the enemy with accuracy, drown them in lead. 5. Above average. Sten Mk II and PPS-43. These weapons proved you didn't need a factory to build an army. Just a tube, a spring, and a lot of nerve. First SMG at level 5. Sten Mk II. It was a symbol of a nation with its back against the wall. After Dunkirk, Britain had soldiers, no guns. The Sten was designed as a right-now weapon. With just 47 parts and simple, resistance fighters were told if it breaks, don't fix it. Throw it away and grab another. It cost about $9 to produce, less than a decent pair of boots at the time. It was minimalism, a metal tube, a barrel screwed into the front, and straight blowback operation. It fired 9mm from a side-mounted 30-round magazine at 500 RPM and weighed 7 pounds. The side-mounted mag let soldiers lie flatter, but created serious reliability issues. The Sten's biggest weakness was its single-feed magazine. If the thin feed lips bent even slightly, the gun jammed. Then there is the safety. If it was cocked and dropped on its buttstock, the heavy bolt could slip forward, chamber around, and begin firing on its own. There are accounts of Stens spinning on the floor, emptying magazines into rooms full of friendly troops. The Mark II became the first successful suppressed SMG. It was so quiet that the bolt cycling was louder than the shot. The SAS and commandos loved it, proving that even a plumber's nightmare could become a scalpel in the right hands. Why level 5? A masterclass in strategic desperation. Second SMG at level 5. PPS-43. The PPS-43 fired 7.62 Tokarev from 35-round magazines at 600 RPM and weighed 6 pounds. It was stamped steel, used minimal machining, featured a folding metal stock, and tolerated enormous manufacturing slop. The PPS-43 could be built faster, cheaper, and with fewer skilled workers. Represents the perfected evolution of the mass-produced SMG. Historians consider it the best cheap submachine gun ever made. Why level 5? No longer pretending guns needed to be pretty. They just needed to exist and work. Level 5 SMGs is where desperation becomes doctrine, and simplicity becomes dominance. Level 6. Very good. Owen Gun and MAS-38. While nations focused on making guns cheaper, Australia focused on making one that simply would not quit. First SMG at level 6. Owen Gun. Australia needed a weapon that could be submerged in swamps, dragged through silt, and still fire every time the trigger was pulled. In famous torture tests, the Owen was dipped into buckets of thick mud and fired through entire magazines without a single jam. Designed by a 24-year-old who built the first prototype in his garage, the Owen fired 9mm parabellum from a top-mounted 33-round magazine at 700 RPM. Weighed 9 pounds. Gravity fed the rounds into the chamber, allowing the ejection port to sit on the bottom, keeping debris out. The receiver was split into 2 compartments, the bolt up front, while the recoil spring and charging handle in the rear, separated by a bulkhead. The dirty part of the gun stayed away from the clean part. The top-mounted magazine forced the sights off to the side. The Owen was incredibly controllable. It was so beloved by troops that they fought to keep it in service through Korea and Vietnam. Why level 6? For extreme reliability and combat logic, arguably the most dependable submachine gun of the entire war. Second SMG at level 6, MAS-38. It fired a 7.65mm cartridge from a 32-round magazine at 600 RPM, weighing just 6 pounds. The bolt ran on an angled track, moving back and down at the same time. This design reduced recoil and muzzle rise, making it accurate, soft shooting, and beautifully made. It was underpowered and slow to manufacture. The MAS-38 represents a nation trying to solve problems through mechanical innovation, rather than industrial simplicity. Why level 6? For radical, high-concept engineering aimed at reducing recoil and size. Level 6 SMGs perfected the tube gun and gravity-fed concept for the harshest environments on Earth. It's the best SMG you've probably never heard of, and a true cult classic. Level 7. Best. The GOAT. STG-44 and Danuvia 43M. This weapon didn't just win firefights, it forced every military on Earth to tear up their rulebooks and start over. First weapon at level 7, STG-44. Germany realized that infantry combat happened inside 300 meters. Full-power rifles were slow and punishing. SMGs were fast, weak, and inaccurate at distance. Germany needed a middle ground. The result was the STG-44, the world's first true assault rifle. It weighed 10 pounds. The STG-44 fired the 7.92mm Kurz cartridge from curved 30-round magazines at 500 RPM. It combined intermediate power, low recoil, controllability, and stamped sheet metal for mass production. It used a gas-operated tilting bolt system, tapping gas from the barrel to cycle the action. The Vampire was developed for the infrared night fighting system for the STG-44. German soldiers weren't just outgunning you, they could see you in the dark. Why level 7? It did the job of an SMG. It fired around and added lethality at distance. Second weapon at level 7, Danuvia 43M. Danuvia 43M pushed the SMG concept as far as it could possibly go. It fired the 9mm Mauser export cartridge from 40-round magazines at 730 RPM, weighing 8 pounds. A lever-delayed blowback system allowed it to stay controllable at high-powered ammunition. The Danuvia sat between an SMG and an assault rifle. Limited production and wartime collapse kept it from reaching its full potential. But it proved something important. The evolution was inevitable. Why level 7? The most powerful and sophisticated 9mm weapon of the entire war. Level 7. SMGs was the death of the submachine gun. The STG-44 was so radical that Hitler initially banned it, until he saw it in action. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the evolution of World War II weapons, you're going to love what's next. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you there.